How to make the most of your media opportunity. What do I mean by media opportunity? Let's say that you have put out a press release, you've written a great pitch, and now you're ready to go to the media with your story. If you've done all this work, you want to make sure that it counts. So you want to make the most of your media opportunity. My name is Shella Gardesi, and I'm the owner of Words Plus Design, a digital marketing agency focusing on PR, SEO, and social media. I'd like to thank you for joining me for this free training video. First of all, and this may be something that you have already considered before you sent out your press release, you need to prepare your main messages. Why have you decided to go to the media, and what do you want to evoke in the public that you are reaching through this opportunity? In other words, when people hear you speak or they read your words in the print media, what do you want people to know, think, feel, or do? Do you want them to know more about your business? Do you want them to feel something emotional about your personal story? Do you want them to take some sort of action, such as signing a petition, or maybe realizing that your product offers something that hasn't been seen before in the market? What do you want people to do with the knowledge that you're going to share with the media? Typically, when you go to the media with a story, you want to focus on 3 main messages. You don't want to have more than that, because more than that is going to be too overwhelming for the public. If you have less than that, you might wonder if there's really enough of a story there. Ideally, you want to have 3 main messages. When you think about your messages, think about them in terms of a press release. For example, your most important message is going to be in the headline. What if you imagine that press release in your head, or you imagine that news story in print? What would you say that the headline would be? That's your most important point that you want to share. Secondly, if you have a headline, you might also have a subhead. A subhead is the bold or larger type that appears directly underneath the headline. You might see that in a newspaper, or you might include one in your press release if you can't fit your most important points into the headline. This would be your second major message that you want to share. And the third message would be your first paragraph. What is the meat of the story? What is not so important that it's in the headline, but it's still very, very important. It's still right at the top of the press release. Or if you're thinking of this as the story, it's right there at the top of the story, at the top of the news. The second tip is that you need to keep the reporter focused. Remember that the reporter has their own job, and it has nothing to do with you or your business. Their job is to entertain, educate, and get the reader or the TV viewer or the listener to keep coming back to their show or publication. They're in the business of making the listener happy, and they're not so much in the business of making their sources happy. In fact, often people come away from the news maybe not so happy about having done an interview. That's why it's important to learn how to keep the reporter focused. Sometimes a reporter might be critical of your main message, especially if you're making some claim. Maybe you have some sort of product that you say will be great for weight loss. They're probably going to go over your claims with a fine-tooth comb. They may test you to see how credible you are. They might even compare your information with a source who has an opposing view. For example, you may have probably watched news shows where they have one person arguing one point and another arguing a contrary point. Reporters often don't know your credentials exactly, and they might start asking you questions that you don't know the answer to. They might even expect you to have these answers. they might take an interview in a different direction than what you pitched to them. Let's say you're a lawyer and you're expected to talk about some product or service that you offer in your law firm. However, some press release has just come out from the government saying that there's new regulations, and now the reporter wants to ask you about these regulations. Even if you pitched your story correctly, a reporter might assume that you are an all-around expert on your specialization and just invite you to the interview regardless. It can be hard for reporters to find sources. You have to be prepared if you go to the media that they might not actually want to talk about the topic that you have pitched to them. How do you prepare for possible eventualities like the ones I just mentioned? Firstly, you should be as prepared as possible. Although if you ask news agencies for their questions that they plan to ask you, they're probably not going to provide them because they don't want you to be too prepared, and they don't want to look like they are favoring you over other sources. They want to treat everyone the same. If they gave you their questions, then it shows a lack of objectivity and probably favoritism to you. This is generally why news agencies will not give you questions ahead of time, but you can ask them specifically, what is the interview about? Who is the reporter? How long will it be? That sort of thing they should be able to provide to you. Secondly, you really need to know your stuff. Just in case, you should start researching trending topics in your industry. You need to know the criticism about your product or service and have answers prepared in case that criticism comes up in the interview. You should review or listen to other things the reporter has done on the subject, because maybe this is a part of their beat and they've written a lot on the topic. Maybe once you read some of the things they've written, you might realize that they have a certain slant that could be positive or negative towards your point of view. Thirdly, you should stay calm. You've prepared your press release and made a great pitch, and you've gotten this interview. But when you get there, they start asking you aggressive questions, or you start perceiving that the reporter is being a little bit hostile. And this is when people say things that they might later regret. Or they may act frustrated, and that sort of thing does not come off great in the media, even if you think that you're completely justified. It's important to be calm so that you're not giving hostile or bad interview answers that might not help the public and might come across as you being difficult. It's a good idea to know how to pivot the interview back to your points. For example, you might say, that's an interesting point. But I think what's really important here is, or you might say something like, that's not really my area, but I do know this, and then go back to your 3 main messages. Learn how to do these transitions that will take the interview away from an off-topic point and back to your major points. The third major tip for making the most of your media opportunity is to think about what happens when the interview is done and you're back in your office. How are you going to leverage this attention? You might see a spike in your website visits. You might see people visiting your profile page. You might get people calling you. You might have more sales, possibly, if all goes well. Firstly, make sure you take a look at your website. Make sure it looks polished and professional. Ensure there's not a lot of dead links or errors. Make sure there's no grammatical errors on the homepage and things like that. Make sure your staff is up to date if you have staff photos. Make sure your spokesperson's LinkedIn page is up to date and free of errors. Thirdly, make sure that your customer support knows that this interview took place and knows exactly what it's about in case they get questions about it. And maybe they need to direct calls if somebody wants to speak to you specifically about what you said in the interview. Would you be speaking to them, or are you going to send them to another trusted source in the company? The frontline staff should know what to do if you get any contacts from people who have heard your interview. So those are my primary tips about how to make the most of your media opportunity. I hope that you have found this valuable and that you can use it in your next media opportunity. My name is Shella Gardesi and I'm the owner of Words Plus Design, and this has been another Words Plus Design media training. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.